My name is Francesca, and I just turned 34 last month. Growing up as the middle child between two golden siblings was like being a ghost in my own home. Nobody ever really saw me. But now, after years of silence, my phone is suddenly ringing with calls from parents who barely remembered my birthday for decades. That unexpected call 3 weeks ago changed everything, and at our recent family reunion, their sudden expectations left me speechless. Before I share how being the forgotten child shaped my entire life, only for my parents to suddenly demand something from me when it suited them, let me know where you're watching from. In the comments, hit that like button and subscribe to join our community of survivors who are learning to stand tall even when others tried to make us small. I grew up in a modest two-story house in suburban Chicago with perfectly trimmed hedges that my father obsessed over every Sunday. Our lawn was always immaculate, our family photos always perfect, our appearances in the community always polished. Everything had to look just right. That was my parents' number one priority. My older brother James is now 38, but back then he was the academic superstar. The walls of our family home were lined with his achievements, spelling bee trophies, debate team medals, perfect attendance certificates, and eventually his Harvard acceptance letter framed in expensive mahogany. My parents beamed with pride at every school function, my father's hand firmly on James's shoulder, my mother recounting his latest accomplishment to anyone who would listen. My younger sister Amelia, now 30, was the athletic prodigy. By age 6, she was already bringing home swimming medals. By 10, she was competing in regional gymnastics tournaments. By 14, she was being scouted for college soccer scholarships. My parents never missed a single one of her games tournaments or meets. They bought the best equipment, hired private coaches, and drove her to training sessions at 5 a.m. without complaint. And then there was me right in the middle. Not quite as smart as James, not quite as athletic as Amelia. I was average in most subjects, though I did have a talent for art that went largely unnoticed. I wasn't failing at anything, but I wasn't exceptionally good either. In our family, being good wasn't enough. You had to be exceptional to be seen. I still remember my 10th birthday. My parents had promised a small party, nothing extravagant, just a few friends from school. I had carefully written out invitations, chosen a cake flavor, even picked out party games. But the week of my birthday, James qualified for the national science competition, and suddenly all attention diverted to him. My party was reduced to a hurried dinner with a store-bought cake that still had "Happy Birthday" written in blank because the bakery staff had forgotten to write my name and no one had noticed. No friends came because the invitations were never sent out. My mother had forgotten. When I asked about them, she looked genuinely surprised, as if the thought had completely slipped her mind. "Oh, Francesca, I'm so sorry. With all the excitement about James's competition, well, we'll do something special next year, okay?" Next year never came. Neither did the year after that or the one after that. There was also the time in 7th grade when I stayed up all night working on a science project about solar energy. I had built a small working solar panel that could power a tiny motor. I was so proud of it. When I brought home an A and told my parents, my father absently nodded while helping Amelia stretch for her gymnastics routine. My mother was on the phone with James's college counselor. Neither of them ever asked to see the project. Then there was the school play in 9th grade, where I had landed a supporting role as the fairy godmother in Cinderella. I left the information packet on the kitchen counter, highlighted the dates, even stuck a note on the refrigerator. On opening night, I kept scanning the audience during each scene. The seats I had reserved remained empty all night. When I got home, my parents were watching TV. "Oh, was that tonight?" my mother asked, looking genuinely surprised. "Amelia had a soccer match across town. I'm sure you were wonderful, though." The thing about being invisible is that you learn to become self-sufficient. No one was going to check my homework, so I became diligent about completing it myself. No one was going to wake me up for school, so I set my own alarm. No one was going to pack my lunch, so I learned to make my own sandwiches by age 8. No one was going to notice if I was upset, so I learned to process my emotions alone in my room. I found solace in art. Drawing became my escape. I would sketch for hours in my room, creating worlds where people saw each other, where middle children weren't forgotten, where ordinary was still worthy of love. My sketchbooks became my confidants, the only place I felt I could truly express myself. Mrs. Abernathy, our elderly neighbor, was the first adult who seemed to notice me. One afternoon when I was about 12, she caught me sitting on my front porch sketching the maple tree in our yard while my parents were at Amelia's swim meet. "You have quite a talent there," she said, peering over my shoulder. I remember being startled that an adult was actually looking at my work, actually seeing me. "Thank you," I mumbled, not used to receiving compliments. "You know, I used to teach art at the community college before I retired. Would you like to come over sometime? I have some supplies you might enjoy trying." Those afternoons at Mrs. Abernathy's became a sanctuary. She taught me about watercolors and pastels, about perspective and composition. More importantly, she asked me questions about my day, remembered things I had told her the week before, and put my artwork on her refrigerator. "Your parents must be very proud," she said one day, as I mastered a particularly difficult shading technique. I just shrugged. "They don't really look at my art." The pity in her eyes made me uncomfortable, so I changed the subject. But I never forgot the look on her face, the first indication I had that perhaps what was happening in my home wasn't normal. By my teenage years, I had created an entire life separate from my family. I had a small circle of friends who actually remembered my birthday. I joined the school newspaper as an illustrator, finding a community that appreciated my contributions. I got a part-time job at 16, so I would have my own money and wouldn't have to ask my parents, who often forgot what I needed anyway. It was my friend Lucia who first put it into words. We were 16, sitting in her bedroom doing homework when she asked, "Doesn't it bother you? What? The way your parents are. Like they came to my piano recital last month, but they never come to anything for you." I remember feeling a strange mix of embarrassment and validation. Someone else had noticed. I wasn't imagining it. "I'm used to it," I said, trying to sound nonchalant. "They're just really busy with James and Amelia." Lucia frowned. "My mom has 4 kids, and she somehow manages to show up for all of us." That night I lay awake thinking about Lucia's words. Maybe it wasn't normal. Maybe it wasn't okay. Maybe I deserved more. But by then I had already built my walls. I had created my own inner world where I didn't need their attention or approval. I had convinced myself that their neglect had made me stronger, more independent. It was easier than admitting how much it hurt. When it came time for college, there was no question that James would go to Harvard with full financial support from our parents. They had been saving for his education since before he was born. Amelia got a partial athletic scholarship to UCLA, and our parents proudly covered the remainder of her tuition, apartment, and expenses. For me, the conversation was brief. "We've put aside some money," my father said, not quite meeting my eyes, "but with James's graduate school coming up and Amelia's training expenses, well, the state university has some excellent programs." There was no college tour, no help with applications, no excitement about my acceptance letters. I cobbled together some small scholarships, took out loans, and worked 20 hours a week at the campus bookstore to make ends meet. Every semester was a financial struggle, but I never asked my parents for help. I knew where I stood in the hierarchy. I chose to major in graphic design, combining my artistic talents with practical career skills. My parents seemed vaguely relieved that I hadn't chosen a completely impractical fine arts degree. Not that they asked much about my studies. Our phone calls grew increasingly infrequent during those years. They would call to tell me about James's latest academic paper or Amelia's tournament results, rarely asking about my own life. After graduation, I made a clean break. I applied for jobs across the country and landed an entry-level position at a small advertising agency in Portland, Oregon. The distance felt necessary, like I could finally breathe. 3,000 miles between us meant I could limit our interactions to occasional phone calls and obligatory holiday visits. Portland became my true home. The city's creative energy, the misty mountains in the distance, the independent coffee shops on every corner, all of it welcomed me in a way my family home never had. I rented a tiny studio apartment downtown, decorated with my own artwork and furniture found at thrift shops. It wasn't much, but every item in it had been chosen by me, for me. At the advertising agency, I started as a junior designer, but quickly proved my worth. Years of having to figure things out on my own had made me resourceful and hardworking. My boss, Vivian, took notice of my dedication and began mentoring me, something no one had ever done before. "You have a unique perspective," she told me after I presented a particularly successful campaign. You see things others miss. I almost laughed at the irony. Of course I noticed what others missed. I had spent my entire life being missed, overlooked, forgotten. During those first years in Portland, I built what I came to think of as my chosen family. There was Jordan, a copywriter at the agency with a wicked sense of humor, who became my lunch buddy and eventually my closest friend. Daphne, my upstairs neighbor who taught yoga and always seemed to know when I was having a bad day, showing up with tea and cookies. And Marcus, a barista at my favorite coffee shop, who shared my love of obscure indie bands and eventually became our unofficial social director, always finding interesting events for our little group to attend. These were people who remembered my birthday without reminders, who texted to check if I got home safely after a night out, who saved articles they thought would interest me. Simple acts of being seen that my family had never managed to provide. My first serious relationship happened during this time with a kind, thoughtful graphic novelist named Thomas. For almost 2 years, we built a life together that felt solid and real. But as things got more serious, my old wounds surfaced. I became anxious about his attention, constantly seeking reassurance, unable to believe that someone would consistently choose to see me to keep seeing me. "I'm not going to forget about you," Thomas said one night after I had worked myself into a panic because he was 2 hours late coming home. I texted that I was stuck at the publishers' meeting. "I know," I said, embarrassed by my overreaction. "I just thought maybe something more important came up. More important than letting you know where I am." He looked genuinely confused. How could I explain that in my experience I was always the thing that could be forgotten when something more important came along? The relationship eventually collapsed under the weight of my insecurities and Thomas's growing frustration with my inability to trust. The breakup was painful but illuminating. It forced me to recognize that my family's neglect had left deeper scars than I wanted to admit. That realization led me to therapy with Dr. Harper, a compassionate woman with silver-streaked hair and a direct manner that somehow never felt harsh. For 2 years, every Wednesday at 6 p.m., I unpacked my childhood, examining the patterns that had shaped me, the defensive mechanisms I had built, the ways I both craved connection and feared it. "Your parents failed you," Dr. Harper said simply during one session. "That's not your fault, and it doesn't define your worth." It sounds so obvious stated like that, but hearing those words was revolutionary. I had spent so long telling myself that I wasn't exceptional enough to deserve attention, that if I had just been smarter like James or more talented like Amelia, my parents would have seen me. Dr. Harper helped me understand that the problem had never been me. As I worked through these issues, my career continued to flourish. I was promoted to senior designer, then creative director for smaller accounts. I started a small side business selling digital art prints online, finally giving my personal artistic expression the platform it deserved. To my surprise, people responded enthusiastically to my work, strangers on the internet, seeing and valuing what my own family had missed. By my early 30s, I had saved enough for a down payment on a small but charming one-bedroom condo in a converted industrial building. The day I signed those mortgage papers was one of the proudest of my life. I had built this security for myself, by myself. My relationship with my family remained distant but cordial. I called on birthdays and major holidays. I sent appropriate gifts at Christmas. I visited Chicago once a year, staying in a hotel rather than my childhood home, meeting my family for carefully timed dinners where we discussed safe topics like the weather and local sports teams. During one of these visits, when I was about 32, I attempted a deeper connection. James was now married with 2 children, living just 20 minutes from our parents. Amelia had retired from competitive sports and was coaching at a prestigious academy in California, but she flew home frequently. At a family dinner, I tried sharing news about a major campaign I had just landed for a national client. "That's nice, dear," my mother said before immediately turning to James. "Did you tell Francesca about Tyler's science fair project first place, just like his father at that age?" The familiar invisibility descended like a cloak. I excused myself to the restroom, looked at my reflection in the mirror, and made a decision. I would stop seeking what they couldn't give. I would maintain basic contact out of duty, but I would invest my emotional energy in people who could actually see me. I called Dr. Harper when I returned to Portland and told her about my revelation. "That's a healthy boundary," she affirmed. "You can acknowledge your connection to them without expecting them to become different people." Setting that boundary brought unexpected peace. I stopped hoping for their approval or attention. I stopped feeling disappointed when they inevitably forgot my birthday or didn't ask about my life. I accepted the relationship for what it was, limited, superficial, but manageable from a distance. And that's where things stood until 3 weeks ago, when my phone rang with my mother's number, and everything changed. The call came on a Tuesday evening as I was putting the finishing touches on a presentation for a new client. I almost didn't answer. My mother usually called on Sunday afternoons for our brief obligatory check-ins, so a Tuesday call was unusual. A flicker of worry made me pick up. "Francesca, darling." My mother's voice had an unfamiliar warmth that immediately put me on alert. She never called me darling. "Mom, is everything okay?" I balanced the phone between my ear and shoulder, continuing to work on my laptop. "Everything is wonderful. Your father and I were just talking about you and realized it's been too long since we've all been together as a family." I stopped typing. My parents talking about me when I wasn't present. That was new. "Uh-huh," I said cautiously. "So we've decided to have a special family reunion at the lake house next weekend. James and Samantha will bring the kids, and Amelia is flying in from California. We'd love for you to come too." The lake house was a small vacation property my parents had purchased about 10 years ago in Michigan. They had mentioned it in passing during our calls, but I had never been invited there before. "Next weekend? That's pretty short notice, Mom. I have work commitments." "Oh, but surely you can get away for one weekend." She pressed her voice, taking on a slight edge I recognized from childhood. "This is family, Francesca. It's important." Something about her insistence triggered my suspicion. In all my adult years, my family had never considered my presence important enough to insist upon. "What's this really about?" I asked. "Can't parents just want to see their daughter?" She sounded hurt, but there was something performative about it. "We've been doing a lot of thinking lately about family and what matters. We're not getting any younger, you know." I consulted my calendar. I did have that presentation on Friday, but I could theoretically fly out Friday night and be back Sunday evening. "I'll think about it," I said non-committally. "Wonderful. I'll email you the details. The lake is just beautiful this time of year. And Francesca," she paused, "we're really looking forward to seeing you. It's been too long." After we hung up, I sat staring at my phone, a strange uneasiness settling in my stomach. In my next therapy session, I described the call to Dr. Harper. "And this is unusual for them?" she asked. "Completely. They've never specifically requested my presence for anything. Our interactions are usually brief and superficial. This felt different, almost desperate." "Are you going to go?" I sighed. "I think I have to. If I don't, I'll keep wondering what it was about." "Just remember your boundaries," Dr. Harper cautioned. "Whatever this is about, you get to decide how much you're willing to give." That Friday, I boarded a plane to Chicago with a knot of anxiety tightening in my chest. I had packed light planning for a quick exit if necessary. I rented a car at O'Hare and drove the 2 hours to the lake house, rehearsing responses to potential scenarios. Were my parents having health issues? Financial problems? Was this some kind of intervention for one of my siblings? The lake house was nicer than I had imagined, a spacious cabin with a deck overlooking the water. When I pulled into the gravel driveway, I could see my father grilling on the deck, while my mother arranged flowers on an outdoor table. James's 2 children were playing near the water's edge with Amelia supervising. It looked like a perfect family tableau from a distance. My mother spotted me first and waved with unusual enthusiasm. "Francesca, you made it." The next few minutes were a blur of awkward hugs and small talk. My father patted my shoulder stiffly. James nodded from where he was helping his son with a fishing rod. His wife Samantha, whom I had only met twice before, gave me a quick hug and immediately started talking about their children's school achievements. Only Amelia seemed genuinely happy to see me breaking away from the kids to give me a real hug. "It's good to see you, Fran," she said, using my childhood nickname. "How's Portland treating you?" Before I could answer, my mother swooped in. Francesca, let me show you to your room so you can freshen up before dinner. I made your favorite lasagna. I didn't have the heart to tell her that lasagna had been James's favorite, not mine. I had always preferred my grandmother's eggplant parmesan. The strange solicitousness continued through dinner. My parents asked about my job, my apartment, even my friends in Portland. They had never shown this much interest in my life before. James talked at length about his children's accomplishments and his recent promotion. Amelia discussed her coaching career and the Olympic hopeful she was currently training. It was all very normal, very pleasant, and completely suspicious. After dinner, as we sat on the deck watching the sunset over the lake, my father cleared his throat. "We have some news to share with all of you." Here it comes, I thought. "Your mother and I have decided it's time for us to enjoy our retirement properly," he announced. "We're selling the Chicago house and moving to a retirement community in Florida." James looked surprised but nodded. "That makes sense. You've both worked hard. You deserve to enjoy yourselves." "What about Grandma Rose?" Amelia asked. "She's been in that assisted living facility near your house for years." A meaningful look passed between my parents. My mother reached over and took my hand, a gesture so unfamiliar it made me tense up. "That's actually something we wanted to discuss with all of you," she said. "Particularly with you, Francesca." "Me?" I asked, already dreading what was coming. "Your grandmother's health has been declining," my father said. "The facility is getting quite expensive and she's not happy there. The doctors think she would do better with family care." "We've discussed it extensively," my mother continued, still holding my hand. "James has his hands full with the children and his career. Amelia travels constantly for competitions." "But you, Francesca," my father interjected. "You've always been so caring, so nurturing." I nearly choked on my wine. When had they ever noticed any nurturing qualities in me? They had barely noticed me at all. "Your job is more flexible, isn't it?" my mother pressed. "You mentioned something about working remotely sometimes, and you don't have children or a husband to consider." The unspoken implication hung in the air. "You have nothing important in your life, so you should be the one to sacrifice." "You want me to take care of Grandma Rose?" I clarified, pulling my hand away from my mother's. "Just until we get settled in Florida," my father assured me. "Then maybe she could join us there. It would only be for a few months, 6 at most." "You've always had such a special bond with her," my mother added. This at least was true. Grandma Rose had been the only family member who seemed to see me growing up. She had attended my school art show when my parents went to Amelia's swim meet instead. She had remembered my favorite foods, saved newspaper clippings about careers in art that she thought might interest me, and sent me small care packages during college when money was tight. But she had been in assisted living for the past 5 years, and my parents had severely restricted my contact with her, claiming that too many visitors tired her out. I hadn't been allowed to see her alone in years. "I have a life in Portland," I said carefully. "A career, friends, commitments." "But family comes first, doesn't it?" my mother said, her voice taking on a familiar guilt-inducing tone. I looked around at the faces watching me expectantly. James looked relieved that the burden wouldn't fall on him. Amelia at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. My parents wore identical expressions of assumed certainty, as if my agreement was a foregone conclusion. "I need time to think about this," I said finally. "This is a major life decision that affects my career, my home, everything." Of course," my father said magnanimously. "Take all the time you need. But the retirement community has a strict timeline for new residents, and we've already put down a deposit for next month." And there it was. They had already made their plans, assuming I would fall in line, just as they always had. The rest of the weekend passed in a haze of passive-aggressive comments and veiled guilt trips. By Sunday morning, I couldn't get out of there fast enough. I made an excuse about an early meeting on Monday and left before breakfast, promising to think about their proposal and call them with my decision soon. On the plane back to Portland, I sat rigid with anger and confusion. For years, I had been the invisible child, the one whose needs and wants could be safely ignored. Now suddenly I was visible, but only because they needed something from me. Back in Portland, I walked into my apartment feeling like I was carrying a boulder on my shoulders. I dropped my weekend bag by the door and sank onto my couch trying to process everything that had happened. My phone buzzed with a text from Jordan. Back from the mysterious family summit. Drinks tonight, I want all the details. I appreciated his concern, but couldn't face talking about it yet. Rain check, exhausted from travel. No problem. Here when you need me, he responded immediately. That small exchange, the easy understanding from a friend who had known me for less than a decade, highlighted everything that was missing from my family relationships. Jordan saw me respected. My needs didn't take my refusal personally. Why couldn't my actual family manage that basic level of consideration? The conflict tore at me over the next few days. On one hand, I owed a lot to Grandma Rose. She had been my one ally in that household, the only one who had made me feel seen and valued. If she needed care, didn't I have some obligation to help? On the other hand, the way my parents had presented the situation felt manipulative and unfair. They hadn't asked if I was willing to help. They had assumed I would rearrange my entire life because in their eyes, my life was less important than everyone else's. I called Dr. Harper and scheduled an emergency session. They're using the same patterns they always have, she observed after I explained the situation. They're dismissing your life and needs as less significant than your siblings. The only difference is that now they're trying to use that dynamic to their advantage, rather than just ignoring you. But what about my grandmother? I asked. She was good to me. I do care about her. That's a separate issue, Dr. Harper said. You can care about your grandmother without accepting your parents' framing of the situation. Have you spoken directly with your grandmother about what she wants? I hadn't. And I realized my parents had carefully prevented any private conversation between us during the lake house weekend. I think that's your first step, Dr. Harper suggested. Before you make any decisions, find out what your grandmother actually needs and wants, not just what your parents are telling you. The next day, I called my grandmother's assisted living facility directly. To my surprise, they refused to put me through to her room, citing family restrictions on calls. Family restrictions, I repeated. I am her family. I'm her granddaughter. I'm sorry, ma'am, but we have specific instructions from her daughter, Mrs. Peterson, about approved callers. My blood boiled. My parents had actually blocked me from contacting my own grandmother. That night, I called my mother and confronted her. Why does Grandma Rose's facility say I'm not allowed to call her? There was a pause. Oh, that old policy. We put that in place years ago when she was getting confused by too many calls. I'm sure it's just still in their system. I'll have it changed right away. Do that, I said coldly. And Mom, don't ever try to control my relationship with Grandma again. The next day, I was finally able to speak with my grandmother. Her voice sounded frailer than I remembered, but her mind was sharp as ever. Francesca, my artist, she said warmly. It's been too long. It has. I agreed, fighting back tears. I've missed you, Grandma. We talked for nearly an hour. I asked about her health, her daily life at the facility, what she liked and didn't like about it. She complained about the bland food and limited art supplies, but spoke highly of her physical therapist and the weekly music performances. When I finally broached the subject of my parents' plan, she grew quiet. They want you to take care of me, she asked, sounding troubled. They say the facility is too expensive and that you'd be happier with family care, I explained. She made a dismissive noise. The facility is paid for through my own savings and Medicare. Your parents don't pay a cent. This was news to me. They implied they were covering the costs. They visit once a month for exactly 45 minutes, she said dryly. That's the extent of their contribution to my care. Grandma, would you want to live with me? Honestly. There was a long pause. Francesca, I love you dearly, but I'm 87 years old with a bad hip and early-stage dementia. I need professional care, and you need to live your own life, not become my nurse. Relief and sadness washed over me simultaneously. I would take care of you if that's what you wanted, I assured her. I know you would, dear. That's why I'm telling you not to. I've actually been talking with the social worker here about moving to a different facility, one with more activities and better food. There's a waiting list, but I might get in by the end of the year. Does Mom know about this? I've tried to tell her, but she doesn't listen. She's too busy planning her Florida retirement. After we hung up, I sat with this new information. My parents hadn't just been trying to push their responsibility onto me, they had been actively working against my grandmother's own wishes. The next morning, I had a difficult conversation with my boss, Vivian. I explained the family situation and the possibility that I might need some flexibility in the coming months. To my surprise, she was immediately supportive. "Family health issues are always a priority," she said. "We can arrange for you to work remotely part-time if you need to be in Chicago temporarily. The Johnson campaign is wrapping up and the new projects could be managed from anywhere." Her understanding made the decision even more complicated. If work wasn't an insurmountable obstacle, was I just being selfish by resisting? I spent hours researching my grandmother's condition, elder care options, and the legal aspects of medical decisions for aging parents. I joined online support groups for caregivers and spoke with friends who had gone through similar situations. Meanwhile, the pressure from my family intensified. My mother called daily with updates on my grandmother's supposedly declining health, though when I spoke to Grandma Rose herself, she reported feeling the same as always. James sent a long email about how family duty should take precedence over personal preference, rich coming from someone who had been exempted from that duty. Even Amelia, who had initially seemed sympathetic, texted to ask when I would step up and do the right thing. The crisis point came 2 weeks after the lake house weekend. My grandmother fell in her room and was briefly hospitalized for observation. My mother called in tears, insisting this proved she needed family care immediately. I took an emergency flight to Chicago the next day and went straight to the hospital. When I arrived at my grandmother's room, she was sitting up in bed looking annoyed at the hospital gown and the IV in her arm. "All this fuss over a little slip," she grumbled when she saw me. I told them I just lost my balance reaching for my book. "Are you in pain?" I asked, taking her hand. "Just my pride," she said, then looked at me more closely. "You look exhausted, Francesca." I managed a small smile. "It's been a complicated few weeks." She patted the edge of the bed, indicating I should sit. "Your mother has been calling me daily, talking about moving me into your apartment. Is that what you want?" The directness of her question caught me off guard. "I want what's best for you, Grandma." "That's not what I asked." I took a deep breath. "Honestly, I'm torn. I love you and I want to help. But the way this has been handled, with everyone making decisions about both our lives without consulting either of us, it feels wrong." She nodded slowly. "During my teaching career, I had a colleague who used to say, just because someone throws you the ball doesn't mean you have to catch it. Your parents are very good at throwing responsibility balls and making others feel obligated to catch them." I laughed despite myself. "That's exactly what they're doing." "Look in the drawer of that bedside table," she instructed. I opened the drawer and found a small wooden box. Inside were dozens of letters, all from me dating back to my college years. "You kept all these?" I asked, astonished. "Every one. You're the only family member who wrote to me regularly. James sends a Christmas card with a family photo. Amelia calls on my birthday. Your parents visit when they remember. But you wrote to me every month, even when you were struggling to pay your rent." I felt tears welling up. "You were always there for me when I was growing up. And now you think you need to sacrifice your life to be there for me." She shook her head. "That's not how it works, Francesca. Love isn't a debt to be repaid. It's a gift freely given." Before I could respond, the door opened and my parents walked in. "Francesca, we didn't know you were coming today," my mother said, looking flustered. "I wanted to see Grandma for myself," I replied coolly. "Well, we have good news," my father announced. "The doctor says Mom can be released tomorrow. We've already started packing up her room at the facility." My grandmother's eyes widened. "You've done what?" "No need to worry about the details, Mom," my mother soothed. "Francesca will take care of everything. Won't you, dear?" The presumption was breathtaking. I looked at my grandmother, who gave me a slight nod of encouragement. "Actually," I said, standing up, "Grandma and I have been talking about her options, and moving in with me isn't one of them." My parents stared at me in shock. My father recovered first. "This isn't up for discussion. The arrangements have been made." "Without consulting me or, more importantly, Grandma," I pointed out. "Did you know she's on a waiting list for a different facility, one she's chosen herself?" "That's ridiculous," my mother dismissed. She needs family care. I need to be listened to, my grandmother interjected firmly. I'm old, not incompetent. An argument erupted with my parents insisting they knew best, and my grandmother and I pushing back. Eventually, a nurse came in and asked us to take the discussion elsewhere as it was disturbing other patients. In the hospital hallway, my father turned on me. I don't understand why you're being so difficult about this. After everything we've done for you. The absurdity of his statement hit me like a physical blow. Everything you've done for me. What exactly would that be? Dad, forgetting my birthdays, missing my school events, making me work through college while fully supporting James and Amelia. That's ancient history, my mother said dismissively. We're talking about now. No, it's directly relevant, I insisted. For my entire life, I've been the invisible child in this family. You've ignored my needs, overlooked my achievements, and treated me as less important than my siblings. And now suddenly, when you need something from me, I'm supposed to drop everything and comply. My father's face reddened. We've always treated all our children equally. I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that echoed in the sterile hallway. That's simply not true, and we all know it. But here's what's going to happen now. I'm going to support Grandma in whatever she decides about her own care. If that means helping her move to a new facility of her choosing, I'll do that. If she changes her mind and wants to live with me, we'll discuss it. But what I won't do is let you use her as a pawn in whatever retirement fantasy you're planning. My mother's eyes filled with tears, but I recognized the manipulative quality of them. I can't believe you would speak to us this way, after we raised you. You didn't raise me, I said quietly. I raised myself because I had to. I walked away, then returning to my grandmother's room to say goodbye properly before heading to my hotel. The confrontation had left me drained, but also strangely liberated. For perhaps the first time in my life, I had directly challenged the family dynamic that had shaped so much of my existence. That evening, alone in my hotel room, I called Dr. Harper and recounted the day's events. I'm proud of you, she said. Standing up to family patterns is incredibly difficult. I feel guilty, I admitted. But also relieved. Both reactions make sense. You're breaking a lifelong pattern. That's never easy, but it's sometimes necessary. Over the next 2 weeks, I negotiated a temporary arrangement. I would stay in Chicago for 2 weeks to help my grandmother transition back to her facility and assist in expediting her application to the new place she preferred. I would work remotely during this time, returning to Portland once she was settled. My boss Vivian was understanding about the arrangement, and my team stepped up to cover the aspects of my job that required an in-person presence. My friends in Portland checked in daily, sending encouraging messages and reminding me that I had a support system waiting for my return. During those 2 weeks, I visited my grandmother daily, bringing art supplies and magazines, taking her for short walks in the facility's garden when she felt strong enough. We talked more openly than we ever had before about my childhood, about her relationship with my parents, about her late husband whom I barely remembered. One afternoon, as I was helping her sort through some old photographs, I overheard a conversation between my parents in the hallway outside her room. They didn't realize I was there. The house should sell quickly at the asking price, my father was saying. That gives us enough for the down payment on the Florida place and a comfortable cushion. What about the proceeds from your mother's house? My mother asked. The market in her neighborhood has improved. Once we have power of attorney, we can put it on the market. That money will fund our travel plans. I felt physically ill. They weren't just trying to avoid paying for my grandmother's care, they were actively planning to use her assets to fund their retirement. The house they referred to was my grandmother's longtime home, which had been sitting empty since she moved to assisted living. She had often spoken of possibly returning there with in-home care when her health stabilized. I cleared my throat loudly and stepped into the hallway. My parents jumped, looking guilty. Francesca, we were just discussing some family finances, my father said, attempting to sound casual. I heard, I replied coldly. Were you planning to tell Grandma that you're selling her house to fund your cruise vacations? Their expressions confirmed my suspicions. This is a family matter, my mother began. Yes, it is, I agreed. And Grandma is family. Does she know about these plans for her property? The uncomfortable silence answered my question. I thought not. Well, this stops now. Tomorrow morning, we're all meeting with Grandma's social worker, her doctor, and an elder law attorney I've contacted. We're going to discuss her care plan and her assets in a transparent way with her best interests as the priority. You have no right, my father started. Neither do you. I cut him off. But Grandma does. It's her life, her health, her property. I turned and walked back into my grandmother's room, closing the door firmly behind me. The confrontation left me shaking but determined. This wasn't just about standing up for myself anymore. It was about protecting someone who had once protected me when no one else would. The next morning's meeting was tense but productive. The elder law attorney I had found, Ms. Brennan, was brisk and no-nonsense. She explained the legal rights of my grandmother, the limitations of power of attorney, and the protected status of my grandmother's assets in relation to her care. Mrs. Peterson has the right to determine her own living arrangements as long as she is mentally competent, which, according to her physician's assessment, she absolutely is, Ms. Brennan stated, looking pointedly at my parents. Her home and savings are her property to dispose of as she sees fit. They are not family assets to be reallocated without her consent. My grandmother sat straighter in her chair as the meeting progressed, her expression growing more confident. The social worker presented several options for her care, including the new facility she had been researching and potential in-home care arrangements if she wanted to return to her house eventually. My parents grew increasingly quiet as it became clear that their plans were being dismantled. By the end of the meeting, a new arrangement had been outlined. My grandmother would remain in her current facility for 3 more months while her application to the new place was processed. Her house would remain untouched until she decided what she wanted to do with it. I would return to Portland but come back for monthly weekend visits to check on her progress and help with the transition to the new facility when the time came. As we left the meeting, my father pulled me aside. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "You've made things more complicated for everyone." "No, Dad," I replied. "I've made things more fair for Grandma. There's a difference." My mother tried a different approach later that day, calling me in tears about how hurt they were, how they'd only been trying to do what was best for everyone, how ungrateful I was being after all they'd sacrificed. It was the same emotional manipulation that had worked on me throughout my childhood, but this time I recognized it for what it was. "Mom, I understand you're upset that things aren't going according to your plan, but Grandma deserves to make her own decisions, and I deserve to live my own life. We can find a solution that respects everyone's needs, not just yours and Dad's." She hung up on me, but I felt strangely peaceful. The guilt that would normally have consumed me was notably absent. When I told my grandmother about these conversations, she took my hand. "They've always been like this," she said. "Your grandfather and I tried to intervene when you were young to get them to see how they were treating you differently. But they always had justifications, excuses. I'm sorry we couldn't change things for you then." "You did more than you know," I assured her. "You saw me when no one else did. That mattered." Before I returned to Portland, I had one final conversation with my siblings. James had been noticeably absent from the recent events, claiming work commitments, but Amelia had flown in after hearing about the confrontation at the hospital. We met at a cafe near my hotel. James was defensive, insisting that our parents had always done their best. "They supported us based on our needs," he argued. "They paid for my education because I was going to an expensive school. They covered Amelia's training because that was expensive too." "And what about my needs?" I asked calmly. "Did they ever ask what those were?" He looked uncomfortable. "You seemed self-sufficient. You never asked for much." "Because I learned early that asking wouldn't get me anything," I pointed out. Amelia, to my surprise, was more receptive. "I never saw it when we were kids," she admitted. "I was so focused on sports on myself. But looking back, there were definitely different standards for us, different expectations, different levels of attention." Her acknowledgement meant more than I expected. "Thank you for saying that." "So what happens now?" James asked. "Mom and Dad are furious. The family is divided." "The family was always divided," I said. "It just wasn't acknowledged. Now we have an opportunity to build something more honest." I'll continue to be involved in Grandma's care. I'll maintain a relationship with both of you if you want that. With Mom and Dad, it will depend on whether they can respect my boundaries going forward. They're not going to change overnight, Amelia warned. I don't expect them to, I agreed. But I've changed, and that's enough for now. When I finally boarded the plane back to Portland, I felt lighter than I had in years. The situation with my family was far from resolved, and there would undoubtedly be more difficult conversations ahead. But for perhaps the first time, I was navigating those relationships on my own terms, from a place of strength rather than invisibility. As the plane took off, I watched Chicago shrink beneath me, the city where I had grown up feeling unseen, gradually receding from view. But unlike in the past, I wasn't running away. I was choosing to return to the life I had built for myself, a life where I was valued and visible, a life I had created despite or perhaps because of all those years of being overlooked. It's been 6 months since the confrontation at the hospital, 6 months of rebuilding relationships on new terms and establishing firmer boundaries. Much has changed, some for the better, some still in painful transition. My grandmother moved into the new facility 3 months ago, just as planned. Cedar Brook Senior Living is everything she hoped for, with spacious private rooms, daily art classes, and a garden where residents can grow their own flowers and vegetables. I visit her monthly as promised, flying to Chicago for long weekends. We've established a Sunday tradition where we spend the afternoon painting together in the facility's bright, window-lined art room. Her hands are shakier now, but her sense of color and composition remains striking. I'm thinking of selling the house, she told me during my last visit. I don't think I'll be going back there. Are you sure? I asked, knowing how much that home had meant to her. She nodded, dabbing blue onto her canvas. It's time to let go of things that no longer serve my life as it is now. The memories will stay with me no matter who owns the building. What will you do with the proceeds? I asked carefully. She smiled, a mischievous twinkle in her eye. I'm setting up education funds for James's children, and a trust for you and Amelia to be used for creative pursuits. I've already spoken with Ms. Brennan about the details. Grandma, you don't have to do that. I know, that's why I want to. She set down her brush and looked at me directly. You taught me something important, Francesca. You showed me that it's never too late to stand up for yourself. At 87, I'm finally learning to say what I want and need. That's your influence. My relationship with my parents has been more complicated. After their initial anger subsided, they attempted to reestablish contact on their terms, acting as if nothing had happened. When that didn't work, they tried guilt, then bribery in the form of extravagant gifts. I returned and finally reluctant negotiation. We now speak once a month on a scheduled call. The conversations are sometimes strained, sometimes surprisingly genuine. They did move to Florida as planned, using the proceeds from their Chicago home rather than my grandmother's assets. My father sometimes sends articles about art exhibitions he thinks might interest me, a small but meaningful gesture of recognition. My mother has started asking actual questions about my life and occasionally remembers details from our previous conversations. It's a process, Dr. Harper reminded me during a recent session. They're trying to relate to an adult daughter they never really got to know because they were too busy focusing elsewhere. It will take time. James remains somewhat distant, uncomfortable with the new family dynamic. Our conversations are cordial but superficial. I've accepted that we may never have the close sibling relationship I once craved. He's too invested in the family narrative our parents created, perhaps because he benefited from it. Amelia, surprisingly, has become a stronger presence in my life. After our cafe conversation, she began calling regularly, gradually sharing her own struggles growing up under our parents' intense athletic expectations. I was never the golden child, she confessed during one late-night call. I was the performing child. I existed to win medals and trophies. If I failed, they couldn't hide their disappointment. At least you had the freedom of their indifference. Her perspective helped me see our childhood from a different angle. Perhaps none of us had been truly seen for who we were. Professionally, the temporary disruption to my work schedule actually led to unexpected growth. My ability to manage complex projects remotely impressed Vivian and the agency partners. 3 months ago, they offered me a new position as creative director for digital initiatives, with a substantial raise and the flexibility to work remotely 2 weeks each month, making my visits to Chicago easier to manage. You've shown exceptional leadership during a challenging time, Vivian told me. The team respects how you've balanced professional excellence with personal responsibilities. My side business selling digital art has flourished as well. I've expanded into limited edition prints and recently collaborated with a small gallery in Portland on an exhibition titled Visibility, featuring portraits of overlooked individuals in everyday settings, each depicted with an inner world richer and more vibrant than their external appearance suggests. The centerpiece was a portrait of my grandmother at her easel, her face illuminated by the light from the window, her canvas reflecting a younger version of herself. The exhibition received positive local reviews and led to commissions from several businesses seeking artwork for their spaces. I'm currently developing a series of workshops for teenagers teaching digital art techniques as a form of self-expression and emotional processing. The first session is scheduled for next month at a community center in a disadvantaged neighborhood. My personal life has seen changes too. The experience with my family forced me to confront my deep-seated fears of invisibility and abandonment. With Dr. Harper's guidance, I've been working on bringing these issues into my relationships, rather than letting them silently sabotage connections. 6 weeks ago, I met Sam at a charity auction for the community center where I'll be teaching. He's an architect who specializes in adaptive reuse projects, turning abandoned buildings into affordable housing and community spaces. Our first date lasted 5 hours, conversation flowing easily between topics from sustainable design to favorite childhood books. When he asked about my family, I surprised myself by sharing the real story rather than the sanitized version I usually offer to new acquaintances. Instead of being put off by the complexity, he listened attentively, asked thoughtful questions, and then shared his own complicated family history. Families are messy, he said simply. What matters is how we process that mess and what we build from it. 4 dates later, when he had to cancel our plans because of a work emergency, I felt the familiar panic rising, the certainty that I had been forgotten, replaced by something more important. Instead of withdrawing or lashing out as I might have in the past, I told him directly how I was feeling. I understand this is about my history, not about you, I said. But I'm struggling with feeling replaced right now. His response was everything I needed: acknowledgement, reassurance, and a concrete plan to reschedule. The next day, flowers arrived at my office with a note that read, "You are seen." It's still early days, but there's a promising foundation of honesty and mutual respect that gives me hope. Perhaps the most significant change has been internal. I no longer define myself by my family's perception or lack thereof. The invisibility I felt growing up shaped me certainly, but it doesn't have to determine my future. The self-sufficiency I developed out of necessity has become one of my greatest strengths. The sensitivity to others that came from knowing what it feels like to be overlooked has made me a better friend, colleague, and artist. I've come to understand that being seen begins with seeing yourself clearly, with recognizing your own worth, even when others don't. My journey from invisible child to visible empowered adult wasn't linear or simple, but each step taught me something valuable about resilience, boundaries, and authentic connection. As I sit in my Portland apartment watching the rain trace patterns on my window, I think about the little girl I once was drawing alone in her room, creating worlds where she mattered. I wish I could tell her that she always mattered, always had value regardless of whether her family could see it. I wish I could tell her that one day she would build a life filled with people who would see her clearly and love her authentically. I wish I could tell her that the very sensitivity that made invisibility so painful would become her greatest artistic strength. But in a way, I am telling her. Every time I stand firm in my boundaries, every time I create art that resonates with someone else, every time I reach out to connect, rather than withdraw in fear, I honor that little girl and the strength she never knew she had. Have you ever had to stand up to family expectations that didn't honor your needs or worth? How did you find the courage to establish boundaries while still maintaining relationships? Share your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more authentic stories about finding your voice. And remember, Sometimes being overlooked allows you to develop a unique perspective that others miss. Thank you for listening to my journey, and may you always know your true worth whether others recognize it or not.